about a week ago, my daughter picked up this really nice 2006 Jeep. And then this weekend, she's getting ready to head up north for a week-long trip. It's about 3 hours away. So we're going to do a little preventative maintenance before she heads up north. So we are going to give it a quick oil change, put a new filter in it. We're also going to throw a new Serpentine belt. The Serpentine belt on it looks pretty worn. We're also going to throw in a set of plugs. And it has a K&N air filter on it from a previous owner. Not the biggest fan of it, but it's pretty old and worn out, so we're going to replace the K&N air filter too. Alright, first up we're going to throw a set of plugs in it, open up the hood and get started here. Alright, to get to the spark plugs to remove them, we're going to have to remove this ignition rail. The ignition rail has 4 13mm bolts that will need to be removed. Here. There's one back around the corner. These first 3 are really easy to get out. The back one, you're going to need a total of 9 inches of extension to get past the heater hoses back there. So I have a 6-inch and a 3-inch extension. So you just break these guys loose and get them out of the way. So just do that real quick. Like I said, this is super easy. And everything's right in arm's reach. It's no big deal to get to. So you can break the, and you can see where the end of my ratchet is sitting right just on top of the heater hose where I'm just past it, and you can break that one free. So next up, you're just going to remove the ignition rail. It pops out of here pretty easy. So you pop that out, and what you want to do is once you pop it out, you want to lift it straight up and pull it back on top of your alternator here, and you can pull it straight back. And then if you want, you can unclip these 2 hoses and unclip your throttle cable. Move that back out of the way. You can move these 2 hoses up with a little bit of slack, and that'll give you a little bit more room to get in the spark plugs, and you can rotate this and push it up towards your alternator, and that'll give you enough access to get in and change your spark plugs. That way you don't have to pull out the wire clip, and unfortunately the wire clip on these things are kind of difficult to get off, so a little bit easier to do it that way. Plugs out, we want to do is going to take a little bit of compressed air, and we're just going to clean up around. Sorry about the noise. And get all the dirt and crap out of those. The last thing you want to do is when you pull these spark plugs that the dirt falls down the spark plug hole. So it won't completely alleviate the problem, but it'll minimize it, that's for sure. All right, next thing is, so I'm using a 5/8 spark plug socket. It does have the rubber insert inside the spark plug socket, which is really quite important, as if you move the socket the wrong way, you could possibly mess up the terminal. The terminal could crack the insulator, the ceramic insulator, and and then you're throwing out a $6 spark plug. A little helpful hint on the first spark plug here: if you put your extension right in between the 2 air conditioning hoses, if you have air conditioning, that's the easiest way to get to that guy. That way you got a straight on shot. And you just go through and you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6 is sitting right back behind those heater hoses. I'll just break them all loose and pop those out. Spark plug number 1 coming out. Working on number 2, number 3, working on number 4, and moving over to number 5 also. And then I'm going to switch the camera over a little bit and get you a better shot. You can see where the extension helps out a lot, getting to number 6 there. So I'm just pulling the plugs out by hand now. All right, so I got all the old spark plugs pulled out. I just threw 4 of them up here, the total of 6 that came out. But the one in the middle is the new one. That's already gapped at 034, 35. The spec calls for 033 to 035. But you can see the old ones that I pulled out, the electrodes are completely wasted on them. So the Jeep runs okay, but it's been really sluggish and the gas mileage is poor. Just a quick reference for you if you want to go back and look at the maintenance schedule. In the owner's manual on page 325, Schedule B, the owner's manual calls for the spark plugs to be replaced every 30,000 miles. So just a quick reference if you're interested. All right, I'm just going to gap the plugs as I put them in. You want to start them all in by hand, but my shims that I have, I've got 034 gap that I'm going to go through and gap all the plugs. Spec is 033 to 035. One thing I did notice, the negative electrode, which is the strap that comes around the top here, these are very long and flexible, so you definitely want to re-gap them, because I noticed when I was taking them out of the box that almost half of them were not gapped properly just because that electrode is so long and moves so easy. So keep that in mind. Like I said, you want to go through and just start them all by hand carefully. Try not to knock any dirt in the hole while you're doing it, but they should start in no problem. I'm just starting to run all the plugs in by hand now. I got going on 4 and 5 back there. And then 6, I got them all started now by hand. I'm gonna go through with a wrench in a minute and just snug them up a little bit. I'm not torquing them to spec yet. All I'm doing is just running them down. All right, so I got all the spark plugs in, started by hand, and just snug down a little bit. So the next thing you want to do is you want to go through with a torque wrench and torque them down. If you're working in English, it's going to be 250 inch-pounds or 20.8 foot-pounds. Or if you're working in metric, it'll be 28 Newton meters. So you can go through all 6 of them, give those a quick torque. There you go. Simple as that. The one thing is just you need a couple long extensions just to keep flipping around. And you know, in my case, I had to get around. Somebody put an aftermarket air intake, so I have to work around that a little bit. But other than that, that was probably my biggest challenge. But for the most part, with a long extension, hey, it's not too bad at all. All right, to finish this off, we're just going to slide the ignition rail back in place over the spark plugs. The easiest way I found to do this is reach back and line up the far back one and the second one out of the plug. That way you ensure that the ones that you can't see, you can feel and make sure they're on, and the rest of them will just line up nice and easy. I think if you do it that way, it's pretty much a piece of cake. There you go. Now just seat that thing down good. And once you're down, you got the 4 13mm bolts, and start those by hand, run them in. What you got to do with the spark plugs is just tighten the rails down. Next up, we're going to torque the 4 ignition rail bolts down to 29 Newton meters or 250 inch-pounds of torque, and that'll wrap up the spark plugs and we'll be moving on. All right, next up, I'm going to address the air cleaner. Now, this does have a K&N air filter somebody had put on it, but typically you can clean these and reuse them, but this thing's completely wasted. I've never seen anything like this before, but it must be at least 10, 15 years old, because the whole air filter is, the plastic's just completely rotted and falling apart. So you can see, I don't even have the flange off of it yet, so the flange was left on. It's not that it ripped the rubber, it just completely deteriorated and came apart. So unfortunately, I did have to buy a new K&N filter for it, but I would prefer to put a stock filter back on, but I did get this guy, and unfortunately, a new air filter was $69, which was kind of expensive, I think, even though it's K&N. So we're going to put this guy back on. Now the good thing about this one, it does have this little nut on the bottom. I can make a bracket and hold it. The other one, the weight of the filter was just holding it down. So I can just put the clamp back on and new filters back on in place. No big deal at all. Super easy. So that's about the easiest thing I did all day. All right, removing the serpentine belt is super easy. 1/2-inch drive ratchet. Slip that in the tensioner, just like that. And what you want to do is, in my case, I'm going to pull up, but it depends on how you have your ratchet. You want the tensioner to push down towards the bottom of the vehicle. So push that down, and then you can just simply slide the belt right off the pulley, and that is it. Okay, once you got the belt off the idler pulley, it's easy. You just pull it off the pulley on the alternator, pull it from the pulley on the power steering. It'll slide off the air conditioner. Goes around the water pump, pops right off the water pump, and the belt is going to come out on the passenger side or right hand side of the vehicle. So you just wrap that around, and the last thing it's on is the crank pulley, and from the crank pulley I'm going to have to go down underneath and loosen it up, and I'll show you how to do that. Down underneath the vehicle, all we're going to do is just slip this off the crank pulley and around, and then we'll get the rest of it from the top side. But you do have to remove that by hand unless you can shake it past there, but it gets in the groove of the crank pulley. It's hard to get past. All right, once you got it off the crank pulley, you can just slip it over the side here, and it will just come straight out on the passenger side, and that's it. Easy enough. Maybe it's not that easy. Easy enough. The space is tight and difficult to see the actual belt routing, so I put a diagram together here so you can see the belt routing before I go and place the belt back in. Placing the new belt back on, what you're going to do is get your belt in a loop like this, pass it straight down on the passenger side of the vehicle, pass the fan, and you want to keep it on the passenger side of the fan. Push that guy down in there, and then what we're going to do next is we're going to go underneath the vehicle and we're going to loop it around the crank pulley. That seems like it's the easiest way to do it. Alright, all we're going to do is pull the belt down, and we're just going to loop it around the bottom side of this crank pulley and take some of the slack up. There we go. That seems to me like it's the easiest way to do it. Okay, now that you have it around the crank pulley, it's going to go around the passenger side of the water pump pulley, down underneath the air conditioning pulley. So it'll wrap almost all the way around the water pump pulley. Get that guy down around there. The belt's wrapped around the crank pulley, the water pump, the power steering, and it's also wrapped around my air conditioner pulley if you do have air conditioning. Next thing you want to do is wrap it around your idler pulley. As you're pulling the idler pulley up, you want to wrap around the alternator and then just simply push down around the last idler pulley and you're on. Easy as that. Pretty much a piece of cake. Alright, next up for the quick oil change, so just a 16mm socket. Oh, that's interesting. That wasn't even that tight. And we're just going to drain the oil out of here. Pop the filter off, and literally a 3-minute oil change. Alright, so I put a pan underneath the oil filters on the passenger side or right hand side of the vehicle. You probably want to do this from the top. I don't like oil being dripped on my head, so I prefer to grab it from the top and do it that way, but that's up to you. However you want to do it. You can do it from the top or the bottom, but personally I think it's a little easier this way. Alright, old oil filters out. We're back on. These Jeeps are actually, the 4 liters are surprisingly easy to change the oil. We're just going to put the oil plug in and tighten that up. And we're about done underneath here. Just clean up a little bit of a mess. One issue that you're going to have when you do pull the oil filter, a lot of times you'll get a few drips of oil. You can see here right on the exhaust pipe. I can go back and I'll wipe that off, but when it gets warm, you're going to smell a little bit of oil burn off the exhaust pipe. The 6-cylinder Jeeps, or 4 liters, require 1030 6 quarts of oil, and the 2.4 liter or 4-cylinder Jeeps require 530 and only 5 quarts of oil. You can reference that on page 315 in your owner's manual. I'm using a synthetic high mileage oil, and I have an offset funnel that I'm going to use because of this air box thing, which is going to be maybe a little tricky. So I've got 5 quarts here, and then I've got another single quart. Dump those guys in there, start it up, check the oil real quick, and then we'll take this out for a quick test drive. All right. Well, that's good. The oil pressure only took about 5 or 6 seconds to come up. All right, just doing a quick double check on the oil, and it looks like we're about a half a quart low, so I'll dump the other half quart in. Okay, the last thing on the list is we're just going to check tire pressure. I know with gas prices the way they are, we're closer to where the tire spec, the better off we're going to be, the better mileage there are. So we're definitely low on these right now. The spec for these call for 50 pounds. I'm going to put about 40 pounds in them right now and see how it rides. I'm afraid if I put 50 pounds in them with this light of a vehicle, the thing's going to bounce right off the road and go for a ride, see how it is, and then maybe I'll adjust from there. just out for a quick cruise just to see how the Jeep's doing. See if putting more air pressure in the tires definitely stiffen the ride way up. See how it does on the freeway. 40 PSI is just way too high. We're just bouncing down the road like a beach ball in the wind right now. Definitely seems like the acceleration's way better. Like night and day difference.
I think that was better.
Yeah.
I had my foot to the floor.
So Haley and I just came back from taking the Jeep for a test drive. Everything worked out good. Changing the spark plugs made a big difference. It accelerates a lot better on the freeway and runs a lot better. So Haley will drive it up to school tonight. It's about a 3-hour drive for her. And she'll give me a call tomorrow and let me know how everything went. But I expect everything to be pretty good, and she'll let me know what it did for gas mileage too. I'm Mike, and thanks for watching 33 Mile Garage.